Tuia, tui tuia. Tuia te hā, tuia te kupu, tuia te kōrero. Tāu te māramatanga. Ko te āhurei o te tamaiti, arahi o tātou taumati. Hapa i te mōhio, whakatū te mātauranga, oranga mai me whai ake nei ti hei mauri ora. E ngā mana, e ngā iwi, e ngā reo, nau mai, piki mai, tomo mai ki te pāhara keke nei. Ka mātakitaki ki o tātou rau tupuna, e tūpiritaha ana, tautoko mai me ngā rau kaumātua, e tūtonu ana he orite, he aparua, kātahi rā, ki te kaupapa, kia manawa nui, ki te mahi pānui, kia mau ki te whakapūāwai o te rito o tātou tamariki, o tātou rangatahi hoki. E te minita, ngā kai whakahaere, ngā kai ako, ngā pautangato, ngā puka tamariki o te mātā tuhi, te mātā kōrero hoki. Tēnā koutou e ngā rangatira, e ngā raukura hoki. E mihi mai koutou ngā rangatira mā ngā tangata kahurangi hoki. Mihi mai ki tēnei pātaka mōhio i tēnei pō. Ko whiro te pō māramataka, engari kaore tātou e haere atu ki waho mō te whaituna. Kao. Ko tēnei pō ka timi tātou i te ikarere kē, i etahi wā kei roto i te māramatika. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rara koutou katoa. No matter our stage or status in life, whichever side of the blanket we were born on, regardless of province, position or potential, irrespective of race, colour, creed, spiritual dominion or godless ideology, whether we come laden as of birthright with individual freedoms and attendant responsibilities, whether we frame these ideas ourselves, each to our own personal expression of tino rangatiratanga, or indeed whether we feel instead the yoke of imposition weighing heavily of subservience and obligation to an ill-deserved authority beyond our apparent capacity to defy, whether any of it is real or we just imagined it after too much time in the rabbit hole. Either way or any other, we all started out, every mother-born one of us, exactly the same, dumb as a box of rocks. For a number of years thereafter, our survival and well-being is entirely dependent upon adult versions of ourselves whose numbers seem to grow as we grow. Depending upon our circumstances, which please keep in mind had nothing to do with any of us at the time, we were loved, provided for, nurtured, treasured, neglected, beaten and further abused, spoiled, ignored, lavished and lauded, given away, taken away, thrown away, utterly corrupted, completely adored. So we can say that the substance of these, our formative years, the sunrise and morning of our lives, was largely shaped by the minds and mouths of others. By mothers, fathers, parents, grandparents, caregivers, families, institutions, communities, villages, tribes and societies. Our teachers, leaders and heroes loom, recede, insinuate or remain irrevocable. Institutions of state contribute, whether we like it or not. Our schools and other places of learning purport to equip us appropriately for life amid the milieu. Whatever the case, for a while at least, we naturally regard these other figures in our lives, these larger versions of ourselves and the stations from which they come, as integral, even fundamental to our existence, as archetypes and examples, as models of who and what we are meant to be, so we will depend before we love. Compelled by primal requirements to communicate and engage with these guardians and guides, providers of every material need, just as these giants seem compelled to provide for, communicate and engage with us. Which is just as well, because for a good few years we're useless at pretty much everything, until mum or dad or someone showed us the ropes. As a new parent 25 years ago, with quite vivid memories of the wringer I put my own parents through on monotonously regular occasions, bouncing out of control and off walls from one misadventure to the next, I actually spent a lot of time thinking about showing my kids the ropes and what that actually might look like. Mum and Dad worked really hard to show me what was what. Their intent to me was evident. Eventually, I was just one of those not inclined to listen kind of kids. Mum was black and white about it. What the deal was, her children had to be self-reliant. Enough at least to sustain themselves out there in the world beyond the nest to fend for themselves. Feed and clothe and shelter themselves, keep themselves presentable. That was the bare bones minimum requirement if you grew up in the Brown house. So Mum set about equipping all her kids with her version of a sustainability toolbox. She started training us from 10 years old in the practical matters of life. That's why I got a watch on my 10th birthday, engraved with my name and date of birth on the back. It's my first grown-up present. And it would be the same for my sisters in their turn. Time to start putting away childish things. Managing my own time now became my first responsibility as a grown-up. While the instrument with which to manage it was to teach me to look after things of value. Turns out I was fairly crap at both. But I learned that being late for school has other time implications, and that losing a precious object hurts more than I imagined it could. I was better as a cook, though. On my 10th Christmas under heaven, I was shown how to put down the Christmas hangi. Mum told me, "Sonny, first gather stones." She also showed me the marvellous utility of an electric fry pan. By the age of 12, I had a fry-up mastered, and I could smash a roast, gravy included, in the pan. I could sew buttons back onto my clothes as well without puncturing myself too many times, and was expected to do so when required. I also knew how the washing machine worked, how to open a bank account in town, put money in that I had to earn now. The good old days of pocket money were gone. Mum even taught me how to knit. But I confess I never finished the sleeve I started, let alone the jumper, and I have never knitted since. But often, as Mum instructed, she talked about her own childhood at Wahipa in Kawhia, about the jobs and duties she was given and some of the old skills she learned and the traditions, the tikanga that came with learning. And that was just some of what Mum's input was. I had the immense good fortune to be born into a context where both parents assumed the task of transforming a little box of rocks into a workable human being. They took the job seriously, and they had to. Some rocks can be difficult to work with, requiring a firm but measured approach. Today, many of our tamariki and rangatahi struggle just to acquire the requisite tools of learning, needed to unlock many of the fundamental skills and further opportunities that gave the rest of us at least half a chance. Knowing how and where to look, how to listen, how to think. Knowing how to ask, knowing what to ask for. Knowing which words to use, knowing who to ask, knowing why they need to know in the first place. Today, 1 in 5 of our 15-year-old rangatahi are reading at or below the basic level required to further their education requirements and opportunities. I'm going to come back to that 1 in 15-year-old in a little while. For now, just understand that some of them will endure lives of complete dysfunction, devoid of any meaningful utility or value to themselves, which means, by and large, that society will probably reflect a similar assessment of them at some future point of intersection. Consider as well that 1 in 15-year-olds are part of a growing generational cohort, trending slowly but steadily higher. 1 in 4 by 2040 is sort of right in the ballpark on the current trend. One last little thing to think about before I continue. It's not all down to the 1 in 5 that they can't make the cut. Meanwhile, on the other side of the coin, if we were born into a nurturing, familial setting formed around notions of kindness, trust, mutual respect, within an environment of relative peace and plenty, or at least enough, and where there was clearly an awareness that someone had to spend the time to show us the basics, then the odds are reasonable, maybe even better than even, that one day we'll probably be okay. Out there in the world beyond the nest. No guarantees, nothing is these days. But how we acquit ourselves thereafter will have anything to do with what we make up of what we were given or exposed to coming up. It all depends, I would suggest, upon the quality, range and utility of our learned, lived and imagined experience, subject to every unknowable variable of consequence and circumstance that lies beyond the horizon of our immediate perceptions and the limits of whatever power we possess. In regard to our children then, our tamariki and rangatahi sitting in classrooms today, starting kindy next year, being cared for in a creche somewhere while both parents disrupt themselves on the wheel of endless undoing. I really don't mean to offer this as some kind of painful elaboration of the painfully bloody obvious, but building our kids into useful, hopeful, intelligent, optimistic, resilient, compassionate, independent, strong, capable, adaptable young human beings, well, that is down to us. All of us, the grown-ups in the room, who apparently run the place. The collective we who provide the examples as well as the substance of their formative years of dependence. So who the hell are we anyway? Well, there's the rub. I love that expression. Only Shakespeare can make a rub sound enigmatic and problematic all at the same time. We are the collected works of every story that in the telling let us hear. That is who and what we are to the children in our charge. We are the narratives of first resort, and the stories are always about life. Some of our narratives are epic, heroic, and operatic. Some of them are crude fictions of cynical intent. Some of our origin tales are bitter, resentful, born of disruption, upheaval, and personal crisis. And some of them, magic and mystery attend, and we cannot believe it impossible. There are legacy stories, narrative threads that bind and anchor and also release, allowing new stories to intercede. Some of our narratives are mischievous, even malicious, made up as we were carried along with someone else's malcontent. Once upon a time, there was even a cultural narrative to which we could all cleave. Back when Number 8 Wire could fix anything, and the only expectation held by a laconic, self-reliant bloke with 60 million sheep was a fair go, mate. But it forgot about 1840 and all the kerfuffle with that other lot. And the ladies who all brought a plate didn't get a mention. The first version of ourselves was built on stories we were told by those we depended on for everything. If we were lucky, they understood that a narrative tapestry rich in content, woven around us every day, would instill a sense of place and belonging. At the same time, they could challenge us gently with newness and mystery, extending our world by extending our narrative, building our story by the simple application and wonderful utility of words, of language, of discourse and dialogue and exposition. If you started here, you were indeed home, because these things were the bricks that built your house of well-being and imagination. We imagine ourselves into existence and a universe comes with us. This is the first and most important function of language, revealed to us ideally by mothers who love and fathers who fear but will never admit it, or even nanas who blitz us with chocolate and sugars and then give us back to their own with a cackle thinking, ha ha, it's your turn now. But really they love us more than life. Here with these origin stories and formative narratives, our dawning comprehension sieves and filters to divine, if we have been so equipped, conceiving the limit of our perception and the extent of our horizon. We take on form and substance here. We may not always obey, we will certainly not always know. Again, it will depend on the story. Wherever we stand as he tangata, he tangata, he tangata, whatever our arrangement might be with the world around us as we navigate the terrain, or within this great iwi ko Ngāti humanity, where human engagement is the most valuable currency of all, except when it's the most destructive force that we can muster. Whether we regard ourselves as a superman, an ubermenschen, he toa, a warrior, a citizen, a cog in a great big machine, or just another bland consumer, it serves us well to understand that a constantly evolving narrative attends each one of us. Our stories write themselves in the minds of others and in our own as we progress. In many ways, these narratives will steer or even predict our experiences. We will accumulate something approaching knowledge, ideally built of an expanding anthology that gives us an even deeper, richer, more expansive meaning as a frame of reference. We come to know ourselves in the process, and the quality of that self-acquaintance will be in every way comparable to the depth and scope of our particular unfolding narrative. In knowing ourselves, we begin to assess, compare, and further engage with others. We become a measure made of our own particular meanings. I wonder, though, are we forgetting the deeply formative place of story in our lives? Have we relegated the splendour of language to markings of bland utility in a techniverse that can render a million realities, calling every one of them virtual without even a hint of irony? Or sit quite comfortably in the convenient accommodation of artifice with intelligence? Have we forgotten the source of our enlightenment, assuming a divinity in the machines that don't even know what the fuss is about, or even that there is a fuss in the first place? Machines don't know anything. They're great at doing stuff, but there's a difference. The machine doesn't know it's doing it. The machine has no idea. I don't remember a time in my life when I couldn't read or write. I guess that makes me one of the lucky ones. Lucky in the sense that my parents ensured that all their children started school knowing the alphabet, how to count to 10, how to write their own name, and in the process, a few other words as well. House, farm, mum, dad, dog, cat, yes, no. Words that began to give me a sense of place and meaning. I also started school with a love of stories. Both my parents told stories as a matter of course. My father, who grew up in the vastness of the outback, Australia, wherever you are, a red-hearted South Australian who cut his teeth in the territory, as he called the North, where the self-taught young man devoured books to create for himself an even more expansive horizon. My wahine taniwha mother, Ngāti Mahuta, Ngāti Koroki, Ngāti Pāua, Kingitanga Hard, whose universe was revealed and elaborated to her in kōrero and pūrākau, that she could extend to her children in the two tongues of this land. Everything, it seemed to me, was explained as a story. If only school did things that way. I started primary school the same week, pounds, shillings and pence became dollars and cents. So at least the maths required to work out how rich I was never going to be would prove easier in the future. But reading as it was taught to me from July 1967 seemed, for the most part, pretty uninspiring. The saving grace would be story time, where teachers read aloud from chosen books and we drifted away in our heads to cause mayhem with Thing 1 and Thing 2, or had a party with Max and his army of beasts, let the wild things clean up the mess. Sadly, it seemed that the older you got, the less important story time seemed to become. Like imagination all of a sudden has to make way for, I don't know, what? Bucket if I know. What could be more important to a reasonably cognitive kid developing full on than imagination? The memorable exceptions, the teacher, who was also the strapper. But he loved reading stories more than we loved listening to them, and watching them as he lunged and parried his way around the classroom wielding his hickory golf shaft, named the Great Persuader, written down the side, like it was an épée or a sabre and he was a drunk musketeer, un pour tout et tout pour un, French even. Or sometimes a relieving teacher, there for just a day or two, and better yet, an afternoon, but savvy enough to know that the easiest route through an otherwise testing ordeal with a bunch of feral country kids on the cusp of puberty was to pull out a book of sufficient adventure with a villainous narrator who brooked neither rudeness nor interruption, and all would be well for the duration. There was a time, of course, when storytellers ruled the world because they were the ones who made sense of it, defined it, gave it shape, and placed it in the universe, peopled it with heroes, villains, immortals, gods and monsters that kept the stars in their place and gave everything a purpose, a cause and a reason. The storytellers told us how it was and why. They told us where we were meant to fit in with all of it. And they told us what would happen if we didn't, or chose not to. It seems likely that our ancestors were telling stories before there were even words to fill in the details, to tease and intrigue with analogy, metaphor and irony, to add layers of beauty to pathos and tragedy, or wisdom and depth to the comedies of life, to communicate knowledge. There would have been the dance, the enactment, the gesture filled out with primal grunts and utterances, emotion, fear, happiness, confusion, utter bewilderment, deep despair, rejoice at overcoming. But words in their time would give the storyteller infinite elaboration. A picture of the hunt on a cave wall may well indeed paint 1,000 words, but 1,000 words from the storyteller's mouth might tell you everything. If there is one constant to existence, to what it means to be, from the quantum minuteness of quarks and electrons to the spiral galaxies of universes, it is, I believe, the impetus to communicate. The mass of a great celestial body communicates with similar mass through gravity, exerting influence, affecting outcomes over eons and epochs and unimaginable distances. Electrons communicate with electrons through the spookiness of entanglement. We communicate with reality simply by observing it, engaging with it, making it therefore so. The flower talks to the bee obliges. A bird gives thanks to the vastness of the sky. It ends up being eaten by a cat who cannot fly. The cat, in its turn, will thank the sky for not being edible to birds. Thus, life and death take turns in an eternal dialogue, but nothing tells the story quite like a human. What we don't know, we make up. What we make up becomes real, sometimes simply by saying it, on certain occasions, like this. We who presume to be writers follow this legacy, telling picturesque lies that carry the gravitas of truth, laying new legends to follow the old and out of date, and better explain ourselves to ourselves, or otherwise confuse, amuse, confide, or confound, whatever our predispositions allow and our readerships tolerate. The last bloody thing we need is a diminishing pool of readers. We could, if we choose, abide the anonymous preacher writing in the book of Ecclesiastes, and not bother reaching for an authenticity of ideas because there is no new thing under the sun. So says the voice of the book. But to do so would seem to suggest that every story tells and ends the same, which I suppose it does in that particular anthology from which Ecclesiastes reveals itself. I don't know, no new thing though. To me, the idea just lacks imagination. For all that, the volume in its entirety is still a hell of a rollicking read, even when it repeats itself, even when you know how it ends. Sometimes it weirdly reminds me of Vonnegut. Of course, in no small way, that book brought literacy to my iwi. How simple it is to transpose a god of the book to a people of words ephemeral whose symbol sounds are of wind and waves and the flowing of waters and the calling of birds, where syllables rest softly next to each other and the sound of every thought carries more than meanings, but essences and energies exist there as well, as vital as blood, as tangible as light, where every sacred utterance of the Manu Kōrero is sifted for nuance and possibly deeper significances, even as memory informs where perception can no longer fathom. When Kendall the missionary provided 14 Latin symbols to represent Te Ha Te Kupu Te Kōrero Te Reo in 1814 up there in Taitokero, Māori understood within the first examples shown to them the power, the authority, the mana of the written te reo. Ha, ka, ma, na, pa, ra, ta, wa, fa, ngā. There from the first. Ha, the breath, the voice, an essential force. Haka, the dance and vigour of life. Kaha, of strength. Mana, of spiritual power and supernatural energies within persons, places and things. Right there in the first, 4 or 5 seconds. I've often wondered if Kendall had turned up with a dictaphone or a tape recorder, would Māori have bothered with the written word? I think so, yes. Māori always had an eye for innovations. Can you imagine an oral life imbued with words as living energies, with tangible spiritual power, carried forth on the mode of existence, defining human relationships with and between te ao, te po and te kore, rendered in breath and rhythms as ancestral sounds of origin and the beginnings of whakapapa, until lost to the ephemeral certainty of echoing silence, leaving behind only the dream and the memory of what was spoken, and then to realise in the moment of making the marks the sheer implications of creating a permanent record of mana, breath and beating heart with thought and intention, even as those thoughts and intentions were made. To perceive and understand that descendants 1,000 years hence could know the heart right now, as it spoke, simply by reading the letters. No wonder Māori was signing a treaty a mere generation later, assuming that written words were the same as unbreakable promises, which in the Māori mind they are when you put your mana on paper. It would be fair to say that my appointment as inaugural tawhirito, reading ambassador, was far and away the most important thing to have happened in my life. The obvious exception being the father of 2 fine and beautiful children to an extraordinary woman and mother, now walking the world as competent, intelligent, curious, compassionate, self-reliant young adults with, as the cliche rightly supposes, the world at their feet. I'd like to think that telling and reading them stories literally every day from day one had some bearing on them, attaining such aspects of character and potential. Actually, it was day 2 for my son. Day 1 was something of an ordeal for him and his mother. So the midwives in charge of the neonatal unit in Nelson Public Hospital deemed it rest and recovery day for my exhausted little puru Tamaea, alone and a sprawl in his incubator, hooked up to the machines that go ping or beep or whatever it is, I can never remember which, an over-eager storytelling father would have to wait another day. These early days of storytelling are not for the child, but the parent. The carer, the supposed bringer of light and life to this tiny part of themselves. If we are born anywhere near cognitively normal, which I would imagine has a baseline somewhere, And all of our organs and limbs and other bits and pieces are more or less where they should be and in reasonably functioning order. As long as we are then tended by someone or two, or as many as you like, so long as they care and love and provide, you're probably going to be okay. But the box of rocks is still valid, not for much longer, but language-wise, from the moment of birth until somewhere in your first half year, you're pretty much void of any linguistic faculty. You have no idea what the racket is, you can't tell shit from sugar. We gurgle and coo and burp and cry without knowing how or why or even who, we just do. And then we discharge and expel and then we do it some more. Yet even here in our language of state, we somehow try to communicate. The animal always needs feeding, even at 1 day old. Surely we know we're useless. We somehow know we cannot make it. Hang on a minute. Alone. I could have just about got away with that. Either way, you go tell your little useless a story every day. If there's two of you, take turns. You are in training. The great thing about humans is we can train ourselves to do almost anything. Not only that, we can learn to love pretty much anything as well. We must be the only animal that goes out of its way to find a life-threatening experience just to get a buzz, because it's fun. It turns us on. Some of us anyway. That's like a pig looking for the pig hunter because he likes to play with his dogs. Mean pig if you meet him, more likely bacon though. Sitting with your child for 10 minutes a night telling stories should not be a life-threatening experience. It's surprising how many of us cannot find the time to learn to love it though. Don't do a goo-goo gaga, that thing either. That's not a story. That comes later with babbling. The stories you tell your child in those first few days, weeks, months when they know nothing, those stories are for you. Like I said, you're in training. You tell your kids what their names mean, if you've named them, why you haven't if you haven't. Tell them what the weather was like on their birthday. Tell them about their whānau, their heritage, what you hope for them, which relatives to be wary of, which ones will never let them down, starting with you. Tell them all your secrets. Ooh, no, not all. Tell them how to be heroes. Tell them how to be brave enough. How to help when someone needs it. How to ask when it is them. Tell them always they are glorious, except when they are not. But even then, don't go too hard. Tell them kindness is better than being mean. But sometimes being mean isn't all bad. Maybe tell them that when there's a lot less rocks in the box. Use the richest language you can. Enjoy the words. Learn to love these stories that will come through in the telling. And you tell them over and over again with elaboration as they grow. Between the books you read to them and with them as they age, they'll come to know every one of these stories. They'll remember and love some of those books. They'll know when their narrative started because you will have told them so. If you do this, there's a pretty good chance they won't chuck you into a shitty old rest home and forget about you when you're old and angry because you couldn't be bothered doing the right thing when it was easy. But don't sweat it. And as the goo-goo gaga thing, the kid will teach you that when the time comes. Though mum will usually pick it up first. Little useless doesn't stay useless for long. Once the eyes find the range and the cry the right pitch, when the nose finally knows, they've got you. By then, they'll have a sense of you, by your voice, your tone, the shapes, the sounds you make, by the fact that they heard you every day or every other day that told them, I know where I am, this is where I belong. Once the babbling starts, the literacy journey begins. And you were right there with them. Please stay the course. Create a language-loving little human. And build an unbreakable bond with your children in the process just by telling them and reading them stories. And don't confuse reading them stories with teaching them how to read. Just keep using the language to tell them and read to them and express to them. If you keep doing that, they'll teach themselves to read. Generally speaking, it is that simple and that hard. Sometimes, though, it's sadly just really, really hard. It will take another keynote to address that particular point, which I will try to undertake sometime before the 26th of May, 2023. Except to say this. Clearly, there are young, struggling, wannabe readers who need structure, and there are young, switched-on readers who do not. There always has been, there always will. There are children who will start school not knowing how to engage with a book, which side to open first. There are families who will not have a book in the house. There are principals and boards of trustees who don't think school libraries are a particularly good use of the school budget. There are people who will always hate books. Some of them wish they did not. If that happens to be you, even now, dig deep within yourself. Remember the pig and the pig hunter. You are a human. You learn to hate books, you can learn to love them. Or at least tolerate them enough to finish maybe a couple before you peg out. Just know when you do, you'll be brighter and a little bit smarter than you are now. For the rest of it, why don't we just put all the tools back in the toolbox, stop bitching philosophies like this way is better than that. You know, if the kid needs phonics, give him phonics. If the kid needs complexity, give him Joyce from The Portrait to the Wake. If the kid just can't see symbols, give them a copy of Sapiens, The Birth of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari, and tell them to follow the pictures. That book will show them a visual narrative of the wisest of the apes all the way from somewhere like a beginning. After that, let them watch a series or episode of The Simpsons. The one called Homer's Enemy may be called an example of juxtaposition or irony, or that thing that sometimes happens in life that no one can explain except to say, what the... I was informed of this, my appointment to this role 30 years to the month after I'd made the conscious decision to be a writer and thereby make a life with no plan B whatsoever. I know it was a conscious decision because I said it out loud to the future mother of my children, in the living room of our first little flat together. A one-room half villa with an 11 or perhaps a 13-foot stud and ornate fireplaces, one in front of the couch where I'd been mulling my decision and finally announced it, and one in the bedroom where I'd lie awake again that night going, what the hell have I done? Good luck, I said. F it, I'm going to be a writer. Good luck with that, she replied. Or at least that's how I like to remember it. But I was 58 years old and in my 59th year, Kate de Golding rang me up one Sunday afternoon, rainy, in February 2021, which meant I'd spent more than half my life in the pursuit of this one thing, and the gathering up of words to tell the stories I wanted to tell, for the totally self-absorbed reason of thinking they bloody well should be told, simply because I wanted to tell them. I'd honestly never really given it much thought beyond that, except that my readers would surely love it because I did. Thus we imagine ourselves humble, modest and generous of spirit. I just completed a commission for Kate de Golding and Susan Paris for the second annual, a children's anthology of writing across the genre spectrum, with old-school production values creating an object of joy and enigmatic authority with a cover to last through the ages. My contribution was a poem recalling my younger days at Kapahaka after the first instruction. I was stoked. I thought I was going to get another commission. But Kate, as she informed me, is a woman of many hats. And on this particular rainy Sunday phone call, the hat she was wearing was until that moment unknown to me, the chair of Te Puna Foundation, an independent charity established to support the work of the National Library of New Zealand. Part of that work involved the administration, development and planning regarding a new literary role, Chawhirito, the reading ambassador for children and young people. She's a kaupapa then. Excuse me. The narrative that emanates from the Harakeke is immense and of great significance, permeating in its wisdoms through every aspect of Māori life, as relevant now as ever. Threads of lasting truth inform us that unity has always made us stronger, that ancestry yields strength, that traditions of worth will last, and that the finest cloak is twined one thread at a time. Harakeke gave Māori the means to gather food, carry and haul, clothe and house and secure the people. Whatu twined and wove the moka, yielding fine cloths, korowai and kahu. Whiri braided leaf and thread, making cords and ropes, lashings and bindings, belts and straps, nets and traps and long lines for fishing up islands. Whāriki and Rāranga made kete mats and food baskets and other utilities. Muka bound the palisades, lashed the waka, made and raised the sail, ensured the anchor, thong the mere to the warrior's fist and the sun to Maui's bidding. Everything is there in the rau tupuna, the great tupuna leaves and the skills, traditions and practices of Te Wharepora, the house of weaving, a comprehensive philosophy on the tikanga of human engagement with the universe around us, there in the Harakeke and the Wharepora narratives. More a state of mind than an actual place, Te Wharepora is guided by the atua hine te iwiwa, daughter of the female element, she is the guardian example of childbirth, weaving, and the transmission of all knowledge. Te Awhirito is the supporting embrace of the new shoots. If you observe a young or juvenile harakeke, you'll note a fan of leaves with a small, vivid centre shoot. This is te rito. The metaphor is a child. The next leaves either side, these are mātua, parents. The next two leaves, kaumātua, grandparents. All the leaves beyond kaumātua, they are rautupuna. These parental and ancestral leaves are te awhi, the embrace. Te Awhirito is not me. Though the reading ambassador carries the title, ambassadors represent, and they have embassies. As do I, in the first instance, Te Whare Atu Nei, the National Library of New Zealand, Wellington. Operationally, it's the mothership, National Library, Stanley Street, Auckland, where Melanie knows where I'm going. Kate and Joe and Elizabeth and a whole bunch of other folks up there do all the tricky, hard stuff that I don't have to do. If a National Library isn't immediately to hand, the library in whatever town I happen to be in will suffice to carry out ambassadorial duties. Tūranga in Christchurch is part of the broader whānau. We do some video production there, online content, kind of TikTok sort of stuff. 3 weeks ago, the embassy was a classroom at Blaketown Primary School in Greymouth, where two kids told me, "You remind me of my granddad." After a storytelling session with year 6, 7s and 8s, I've never been compared to someone's granddad before. And I have to say, it's kind of a nice feeling. We were 4 writers, one among us being an illustrator as well, but all raconteurs by Storylines Tour to Taipotini, 5 days from Harihari in the south to Karamea, as far north as the road will take you, where banana trees will grow if you let them. I'll say this though, in a lot of ways they do it pretty hard on the coast. A monument at the mouth of the river remembers too many drowned young fishermen, while nearly 140 coal miners have perished looking for something that no one seems to want anymore. And then there's the weather. There's always weather on the coast. This was the 3rd Storylines tour for me this year, with Taranaki and the journey around the maunga in September. Some days you're up there for 5 days and you can't see the maunga, you think it's a trick. And then Taitokero, the far north in June. I believe these journeys are invaluable to writers and readers alike. It takes the writer out of their happy place and into the real world, occupied by their readership, and it brings both parties to a shared perspective in the work, making books seem more accessible and perhaps a little less daunting, especially when the writer goes off script on some random digression, only to forget where he started from because somehow he got himself somewhere he didn't know where that was. It can be good for readers to learn that even writers get lost sometimes. Dunedin Public Library serves the literary city well. It's a good place for a public conversation on the Te Awhirito Kaupapa, the opening event and well attended of a 5-day visit to James K. Baxter's hometown. In fact, I arrived in Dunedin exactly 50 years and 4 days after Baxter's death. Rather suddenly and quite poetically, I suppose, aged 46, when he keeled over on a stranger's couch in the living room of a house he'd never even visited before in suburban Auckland. Just wandered in off the street, so they say, after suddenly feeling a bit like he was dying, I suppose. Anyway, as the story goes, Baxter plonks himself down on the stranger's couch, with the owner of the place just sort of sitting there in his favourite armchair, having a cup of tea, somewhat bemused, I expect, and Baxter says, and not a lot of people know this, "I've got a wife and kids in Wellington." That's it. Gone. Kua mate, haere, haere, haere ki te pō. Baxter's death always reminded me of one of his poems about death. Winter unwraps a parcel of stones for old and sick and sad and homeless walkers, which very nearly sums it up. It's a short, quite unadorned and rather beautiful piece, which ends Hine nui te pō with teeth of obsidian and hair like kelp, flashing and glimmering at the edge of the horizons. But 50 years and 5 days later, I'm talking to Kate de Goldie on an evening as far away from winter and obsidian teeth as a jealous spring allows. And I have to say, I could talk to you all summer, Kate. You are sage, feisty, energetic, fearless, I think, and committed, and I owe you more than you know for your advice and your perspective on matters germane and unexpected. We were in Otepoti, Dunedin this week, the week before Greymouth. A Te Awhirito task force, you might say. Kate de Goldie, just in from Wellington that day. Kate and Elizabeth from Mothership Auckland, with Alex Woodley from Point Research, gathering data on communities of readers, projects in Dunedin and Canterbury. No one thought I reminded them of Grandad in Otago. But the Ministry of Education Dunedin, National Library South Dunedin and Dunedin City Council Māori Partnership and Policy Directorate made excellent hosts, and they all committed kaimahi ki te kaupapa. They too are o tupuna. While there, we engaged with several schools and the only kura kaupapa in Dunedin, where we kōrero robustly on the implications of a post-colonial narrative in 21st century Aotearoa and how such a narrative might express itself in the usual forms or in new forms. And who among them, 50 years after Witi Ihimaera published Pounamu Pounamu and Api Taylor raged as to the freezing worker, who might add a voice to this narrative? And form, what form might that voice take? The senior kura is curious and hungry. The junior kura is excited and eager. There is real joy throughout kura, not just in Dunedin, in hearing and speaking te reo. That was, I think, the 7th or 8th kura kaupapa where Te Awhirito came to kōrero. This buzz, this tangibly uplifting energy, like a kind of ihi, hovers about all kura these days. These are not Māori moments in isolation. To view it from another perspective, the only genre in the book trade to experience double-digit percentage growth year on year for the past 3 years in Aotearoa, New Zealand, according to booksellers' numbers, te reo. Whakatane and the Fringes of Tūhoe welcomed us in May. Matariki was significant this year, a Māori narrative celebrating a national holiday that emanates from this land under that sky, using tikanga to guide it. Aotearoa, New Zealand matured a little bit more this year, I believe. And I agree with something I heard Dr. Rangimā Tāmua himself, a Tūhoe, comment on, that Matariki could become, or in its way, perhaps it already is, the biggest storytelling festival in the world, with a whakapapa that extends all the way to the gods. Before the first waka, a seafaring, storytelling Polynesian history and a vast and expansive Austronesian prehistory, placing us squarely in the Pacific as a nation. I also met Tamaiti in Whakatane. I've wanted to meet that fella for a long time. 50 years ago last month, Ngā Tamatoa, along with Te Reo Society at Victoria University and the Young Māori Students Association, they presented a petition to Parliament with 33,000 signatures demanding what? Te Reo in schools. And what do we see today? Te Reo inclined towards a broader horizon, crying out for more and more ngā puka puka i Te Reo Māori. So you can see that Te Awhirito represents a growing network of potential and real support and infrastructure of institutions, initiatives, passionate, committed people who will make it all function according to a multitude of contexts, settings and requirements. The intent, as far as I'm concerned, is to reignite a passion for reading, somehow. And to extend Te Awhi, to better nurture and support the new shoot, to give our children, our young people, tamariki and rangatahi, the best chance we can of fulfilling their potential. Te Awhirito's infrastructure includes public and private entities and initiatives from a wide range of sectors and from all across the motu: National Library, Read New Zealand, Te Paumuramura, Storylines Trust, Te Puna Foundation, Creative New Zealand, Oranga Tamariki. Turanga Library is noted as great support. Duffy Books have reached out. The Publishers Association of New Zealand, of course, has a long-term interest in the kaupapa, as do booksellers, with a swag of bookshops involved in quietly supportive ways, often running their own community-based programs encouraging kids to pick up a book and broaden their horizon. Publishers, writers, journalists who take an interest, media outlets, just by doing their job, become part of the Te Awhirito thing. Phantom Bill stickers put skin in the game of the public awareness poster campaign, still in its infancy, but they gave us production and nationwide coverage for nothing. The Crusaders franchise is starting a reading program. In the coming season, putting players into Christchurch and Canterbury schools, it's not about rugby for them, it's about serving the well-being of their community simply by reading stories to kids. As former coach and playing great Robbie Deans commented in reference to something another high-performance trainer, Dave Hadfield, once said to him, "We are the same people over time, other than the people that we're exposed to and the books that we read, in terms of advancement, learning and evolving. Expose yourself to the learning of others." The Highlanders have a reading program in Otago, and I'm pretty sure there's a little league club in Tokoroa that had or maybe still has a reading program. They've had it for years. It still does. It's been going for a very long time. Huntly College Community of Readers. One of my marae's in Huntly, Wahipa. They are part of the Te Awhirito whānau, and so they should be. Their story is magnificent. It should be screened in every school in the country. a student-inspired reading program in a so-called turnaround school. That's like the bottom 6 schools. Among their first demands, revitalise our library. They were ambassadors for reading a year or so before me. Check these young rangatira out on the Oranga Tamariki Hear Me, See Me platforms. And thank you, Oranga Tamariki. Misha and your crew, you gave those rangatahi a voice. Tuia te hā. When you do that, it allows them authority. And they deserve it. Every bit of it. I have to say, it does perplex me when exactly did school librarians diminish in their educational value to such an extent that a library is at best a discretionary spend out of a school's total budget allocation. Discretion as to whether to spend money on books, a properly appointed room to keep them in, and a professional school librarian to look after them in a school just feels a little bit counterproductive and mixed messaging to me. I used to think libraries were mandatory at every school until I noticed schools without them on Writers in Schools visits. Now, I confess, I don't even know whether libraries have ever been specifically mandated as integral to a school or other educational environment. How have some schools never had a library? Why isn't a school library as sacrosanct as a classroom? Have we forgotten what libraries actually represent, why they're free public utilities and public spaces, providing access to all the information vital to its citizenry? Is an old-fashioned word, citizenry. Free libraries are democratic institutions. Good democracies believe that citizens should be freely informed of all their freedoms, their rights, their responsibilities, their obligations and their opportunities. School libraries are an extension of those beliefs and ideals. Schools would seem the obvious place to present them, especially the opportunities represented in being able to explore the scope, range and depth of human experience expressed with imagination and creativity. That's the opportunity. Consider as well that books can be out of reach as a purchase to a family bringing in minimum wage or the benefit. Wealth inequality always seems to correlate in fairly predictable ways with the trend lines revealed in measuring the usual battery of socioeconomic, educational, health and well-being indicators, including those that measure reading and literacy. There is very real concern today that unacceptable numbers of our 15-year-olds, that year 10 cohort, won't even be able to read to the basic level required just to fully contribute to their continuing education requirements, let alone grapple with the apparent opportunities may or may not exist for them or even some of their better read peers out there in a world suddenly more inclined towards disruption than to any illusion at all of an orderly ascent into a more inclusive future. 1 in 5 of them are reading below this basic level. Many of those 1 in 5 come from non-reading homes. They don't see reading role modelled, they don't have books in the house. The school and the library may be their only access. I know what illiteracy and our illiteracy in our young people looks like. I've sat across the table from it in Te Punawai o Te Hinapua, Korowai Manaki, Te Aurere a Te Tonga, Te Maioha, or Parekararangi. The 4 main Oranga Tamariki Youth Just Residences in Christchurch, Auckland, Palmerston North and Rotorua respectively. Ironically, engaging the young people in those writing workshops to create a narrative of their experience. I'll tell you one thing, I've never met a kid who wanted to be illiterate. But I've met a lot of illiterate kids with powerful stories they've been trying to tell for as long as nobody would listen. We need to explore other ways to accommodate other vernaculars. If our children make it all the way through school, they are something like a captive audience for 13 years, but they're not as captive as YJ. Most illiterates are gone by year 11, and they are angry, mostly because nobody listened. That a kid can get to year 11 before NCEA requirements out him as illiterate says a lot about that kid's raw natural intelligence. We might make some assumptions about other aspects of that kid's life based on mountains of research and statistics over past generations, not just educational, reading or literacy research, but socioeconomic, health, well-being, lifestyle, leisure activities, whatever. Of course, we've always got the benefit of past experience. What will it all tell us? I think it'll tell us what we probably already know. Usually, they're poor, and for the last few generations, too many of them have been brown. My very first media engagement as Te Awhirito was to be an early evening live-to-air interview with Claudette Hauiti of Radio Wātea. Around 8 or 9 minutes, it was a Thursday evening in May 2021. I'm in my hotel room in a refurbished Royal Hotel Featherston. I was there for Booktown. Triple checking my phone, fully charged with the volume up. It's nearly dark outside. I'm really nervous and I'm trying to distract myself by a brief reminiscence of the last time I was in the Royal Hotel in Featherston. It was over 40 years ago. I was 18. I just left Charity College, and I remember a jug cost $1.40 and the beer was kind of meh. I'd been briefly briefed, which was okay. I had a media person. I've got a media person. So I'd been briefed, which was kind of okay. I got to say, since I've had journos in my life as a kind of an occasional thing, I much prefer not knowing what's coming. Forming answers to questions you think you're going to get seems like an easy way to come unstuck. If the interviewer, either on a whim or simply responding to how you answered one question, deviates from the known into somewhere else of unfamiliar dimensions, which, I should add, is probably quite acceptable eventuality if it serves the kaupapa of the interview overall. After a courteous tēnā koe Ben and a brief intro as to my new role, Claudette asked me, I think, the best question I've ever been asked since journalists became an occasional part of my existence, and I wasn't exactly expecting it. I'm relying on memory here, but I'm pretty sure it's not far off the mark. Tell me, Ben, being Māori from an oral tradition, how do you reconcile being our first reading ambassador? Boom, Claudette, you earn your money. To me, there's only one possible answer. Just redefine what reading is, Claudette. In that moment, the validity of an oral tradition, of kōrero, of storytelling is a fundamental foundation, without which a love of reading will almost inevitably subside, was made real to me. It's a realisation I may never have come to without such a kick-ass question. If the brief is to inspire a love of reading, it has to begin with our first informative stories, which means it has to begin, like everything else, at home. How could it be otherwise? Pūrākau delivered orally has literary worth. Tau Parapara is poetry. Whai kōrero demonstrates vast and deep complexities of meaning known differently, with aspects of indefinable quality, except that you feel the wairua and the ihi within the speaker and the words in a tangible way. But all of us, Māori, Pākehā, Pacifica, Asian, Arab, Jew, Gentile, we all have origin stories. All of us came from the somewhere else to here. We all started out as the same box of rocks. That is why I say, keep on saying, tell your children stories every day, from as early in their life as you can, for as long as they will put up with you. Read them stories. Read them like you own them. Do the voices. Pull the faces. Show your children the utility and authority and beauty of language. The grace and power of story. Understand explicitly that everything that comes to them in their lives will have something to do with the words they choose and the time and how they chose to use them. Show them by your example, and you will have given them the best chance ever of fulfilling their potential. Kia ora, everyone. Thank you very much. That's the pānui.